I've never been afraid of the dark. Even as a kid, I could walk through the woods at night without flinching. But 3 months ago, I learned there's a difference between dark and the kind of darkness that stares back. I'd been driving for hours through a stretch of Australian outback between Alice Springs and a remote mining town. It was the kind of road that barely qualified as a road, just dirt, dust, and occasional tire marks. The heat during the day had been punishing, but by night the temperature dropped so sharply it felt like walking into another world. My plan was simple: make it to the town by midnight, crash in a cheap motel, and start my inspection job at a mine site the next morning. Then I saw the sign. It was a rusted, bullet-pocked thing leaning to one side. Marlow Creek, 12 kilometers. I had never heard of it, but my GPS, when it still had a signal, had shown no such place. It wasn't on my route. I should have kept driving, but my fuel gauge was low, and the thought of a closer stop before midnight was tempting. The turnoff was a narrow dirt track lined with gnarled gum trees. I drove slowly, watching my headlights paint strange shadows across the road. The air seemed heavier, as if I'd driven into a different climate zone. My ears even popped like they do on a plane. After 10 minutes, the trees opened up to reveal a cluster of old wooden houses. Some leaned at odd angles, as though they'd been built in a hurry and then abandoned to rot, but a few had faint lights in the windows. I told myself it was just a small, quiet town. I parked in front of a building that looked like it might be a general store. Through the dusty window, I saw shelves lined with jars, tins, and packages, but all the labels looked old-fashioned, like something from the 1950s. The door creaked when I pushed it open. The man behind the counter was tall and thin, with pale eyes that didn't seem to blink enough. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Evening," he said in a slow drawl. "Hey," I replied. "Is there somewhere I can get fuel around here?" He tilted his head slightly, as though I'd asked something strange. "Fuel? No station. Not anymore." He glanced at the shelves, then back at me. "But you can stay the night. There's a boarding house. Miss Keller runs it." I hesitated. "Boarding house? Is there anywhere else?" His smile widened. "Not unless you want to sleep in your car. Roads aren't safe at night." That should have been my cue to leave. But my tank was low, and the thought of breaking down in the middle of nowhere kept me rooted. He gave me directions to the boarding house. It was a 2-story building with peeling paint and a veranda that groaned under my weight. Inside, a woman in her 60s greeted me with a politeness that felt rehearsed. She led me to a room at the end of the hall. The wallpaper was faded, the bed sagged in the middle, and the single window faced the street. I thanked her, closed the door, and sat on the bed. That's when I noticed it, the sound. At first, I thought it was the wind, but it had rhythm, soft, deliberate taps, like fingernails on wood. They came from inside the wall, behind the bed. I pressed my ear to the wallpaper. The tapping stopped. Then, clear as day, a voice whispered, "Don't let them see you at the window." I jerked back so fast, I nearly tripped. My heart was hammering, but I forced myself to look out the window anyway. There, standing in the street, was a man I hadn't seen before. His skin was so pale it almost glowed under the moonlight, and his face, it didn't look right. The proportions were off, eyes too far apart, mouth too wide. And he was smiling directly at me. I stepped back from the window, my breath coming in short, shallow bursts. The man outside didn't move. He just stood there with that unnatural grin frozen on his face. I yanked the curtains shut and sat on the bed, trying to convince myself I was overreacting. Maybe he was just some harmless local. Maybe his features only looked strange in the moonlight. But then came the tapping again. This time, it was faster, more urgent. I pressed my ear to the wall. The voice whispered again, still soft, still urgent. "He knows you saw him. Don't go outside." I bolted upright. My first thought was to grab my bag and leave, but the room door wouldn't open. The knob turned freely, but the latch stayed stuck. It was as if it had been locked from the outside without making a sound. I pounded on the door. Hey, hello? Miss Keller? The door's stuck. No answer. The tapping shifted, moving toward the corner of the room, and then I heard another sound scraping, like something sharp being dragged along the baseboards. The whisper came again, under the floorboards. I didn't want to look. Every instinct in me screamed that I didn't want to know what was under there. But fear mixed with a strange curiosity, and I found myself kneeling beside the bed. The carpet was worn and thin, and near the corner it was loose. I peeled it back to find an old wooden plank. I pried it up with my pocket knife. Inside was a narrow crawl space, and in it, a small, leather-bound book. I pulled it out, dust falling from its cover. The pages were filled with handwritten names, each with a date beside it. The earliest entry was from 1924. The most recent, just 2 weeks ago. And my stomach turned when I read it. It was my name. I hadn't signed anything. I hadn't told anyone here my full name. Yet there it was, written in neat, slanted handwriting, followed by tonight's date. Before I could process it, the lights flickered, then went out entirely. The darkness was thick, like ink filling the room. I reached for my phone, but the screen refused to turn on dead, though I'd charged it that morning. From the hallway came the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps. They weren't Miss Keller's. These were heavy, dragging slightly, as if the person walking had one bad leg. They stopped right outside my door. Then, the doorknob began to turn slowly, back and forth, as though whoever was on the other side was deciding whether to come in. I backed toward the corner, gripping the book like a shield. The tapping in the wall started again, frantic now, almost like it was trying to drown out the sound of the turning knob. Then a voice, not a whisper this time, but clear, cold, and deep, spoke through the door. You shouldn't have opened the floor. The knob stopped turning. The footsteps moved away, slow and deliberate, down the hall and toward the stairs. I didn't dare move for what felt like an hour. When I finally worked up the courage to try the door again, it swung open easily. The hallway was empty, but at the far end, near the top of the stairs, stood the pale man from outside. Only now, his grin was gone. His eyes were fixed on me, wide and unblinking, and in his hand, he was holding a small, leather-bound book, an exact copy of the one I'd found under the floorboards. For a moment, we just stared at each other, me frozen at my doorway, him standing like a shadow at the far end of the hall, holding that book. It was impossible. I looked down at the one in my hand, then back at him. The cover, the color, even the faint tear along the spine, it was identical. My stomach churned. I took a slow step forward. What do you want? I asked, my voice shaking. He tilted his head, almost curious, but didn't speak. Instead, he opened his copy of the book and began to turn the pages with deliberate care. The sound of paper moving seemed deafening in the silence of the hallway. When he found the page he wanted, he tapped it with one long, pale finger. Tonight, he said finally. His voice was cold and flat, as though he were simply reading a fact. It's your turn tonight. Something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to just stand there and wait for whatever turn he meant. I ran, not toward him, back into my room. I slammed the door shut and shoved the desk against it. The tapping in the walls started again, rapid and panicked. The whisper was back, urgent and desperate. Leave the book. Leave it where you found it. I looked at the thing in my hands. My name, written in neat black ink. The date. My breath came faster. I dropped to the floor, pulled up the loose plank, and shoved the book back into the crawl space. The tapping stopped instantly. I sat there in silence, listening. The hallway beyond my door was quiet. No footsteps, no whispers, just the faint creak of the old building settling. I waited another minute before sliding the desk away and opening the door a crack. The hallway was empty. The man was gone. I grabbed my bag and ran, down the stairs, across the lobby, straight out the front door. The night air was cold and sharp, but I didn't stop running until I reached my car. My keys shook in my hand as I tried to start the engine. That's when I saw her, Miss Keller, standing in the middle of the street under the flickering street lamp. She didn't move. Her eyes followed me as I started the car. She raised one hand, palm up, and I saw it. The same leather-bound book. Not mine. Not his. Another one. Her lips moved, just enough for me to catch the words. You can't outrun the list. I floored the accelerator and didn't look back. I drove through the night, past the edge of Marlow Creek, past the lonely gas station, past everything, until the sun rose. By then, I was miles away. I pulled into a diner parking lot, too exhausted to keep going. Inside, I ordered coffee. The waitress smiled as she brought it to me. "Long night?" she asked. I nodded. She set the cup down, and as I reached for it, something slid out from under the saucer. A small, leather-bound book. I didn't touch it.